every now and again, and I've had this problem for years. I'll watch an episode or rewatch an episode, and I have difficulty watching it. Like I'm watching it, and I just don't want to. Like I find myself skipping forward, for example. Like rather than actually sitting and watching the whole episode live, I'll just watch a scene, skip forward, watch a scene, skip forward, skip, 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 and I've had that problem, like I said, for years. That's nothing new for me. And this episode was like that. I did end up, of course, actually watching it, but I might as well not have. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I decided to finally analyze why that is. Why I have that whole skip forward problem. Usually I associate episodes that I have that problem with as awkward episodes. I've actually mentioned this before. I remember blah 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 as an awkward episode. A really good example of this is a lot of season 1 and season 2 Enterprise episodes, which I can watch in about 3 minutes because I can just skip through most of the episode because I don't actually want to sit down and actually watch the whole thing as a result of this problem. But with this episode, I'm like, why am I having that problem with this episode? Now, I don't know if this applies to other episodes, but there's two big things that really make it shine in this case. Number one, there is a degree of awkward factor. There's a little bit of blatant social rudeness on display, which is never something I enjoy particularly being around or engaging with. But more to the point, this episode's kind of pointless. This episode has all of the hallmarks of something that actually matters. The final send-off of Ichib. And I know, final send-off, he's only been with us for like 3 or 4 episodes. Nevertheless, it does feel like they're trying to do something to continue the story onward. Ichib leaves the group. The other Borg, you're on attack. The other Borg children stay on board. Seven has to learn a lesson about humanity, because of course Seven has to learn a lesson about humanity. But for once, I'm not upset about that. Because it makes sense. One of the bigger lessons about being an adult and growing up and humanity and all that is loss. It's no wonder that so many parents deliberately try to get their young children pets. Not just because it brings the child joy, which is obvious, but, and I know this sounds horrible, because that pet will die. And one of the frankly easier ways for a child to understand concepts of death and to know what that means is through a pet. That's the first way I was introduced to death. And I'm sure the same could be said for a lot of people. So, the coping with loss and coping with what that means and how that changes you and all that fun stuff, that is a genuine lesson about humanity that Seven doesn't learn in this episode, but I don't want to get too much ahead of myself. Suffice to say that, she's going to actually learn a real lesson about humanity, and so it's going to be an episode really helping Seven's character growth and helping her to move forward, and Ichib's going to leave on, big send-off, blah, blah, blah. And then it yanks the rug out from under you and says, nope, psych! This episode is basically psych the episode. And I think that's what really irritates me about it. On the one hand, there's several circumstances in which you could assume there is foreshadowing in the writing, but there's too much narrative cheating for me to really give too much credence to that. Like, there are scenes where they're like, oh, Icheb, you're going to have a great future here, and it'll be great, and you belong here, and blah, blah, blah. And his parents do fight very hard for him to be returned to them, which does make sense, given the fact that they want to immediately send him out and turn him into a bomb again, in relative terms. But, on the other hand, there's a lot of narrative cheating. Now, if you don't understand what I mean by narrative cheating is when something happens that is only for the sake of the audience. Something happens that probably shouldn't happen, that is being done to, like, it's when a story, this is especially true in live action stuff, I'll explain why in a minute, when a story is trying really, really, really hard to convince the audience of A, when B is actually happening. And so they'll try, rather than presenting things in a well-written, carefully, smart format, they just cheat. They just make it so blatantly, apparently, disgustingly obvious that things are A, that the audience has only two choices: either to presume that things actually are A, or B, or to be an experienced viewer of fiction and therefore think, okay, well, what's the twist? Just waiting for it. And sure enough, there is a twist, and they're going to send him off and blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to go numerically over each scene. There were many scenes, multiple scenes, at least 3 I could come up with right off the top of my head that were narrative cheat scenes where they tried really, really hard to convince you that his parents are loving, caring parents who know what's best for him, and each of will be happy and have a great, long, amazing life there, and blobbity freaking blue. And then, like, within minutes of him being there, they're like, okay, send him off, screw him. You know, now we have the reveal, we're actually evil, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to talk about that last, by the way. The morality of what they do. Let's leave that alone for the moment. So, it's a weird situation where Seven has to learn a lesson, but she doesn't. Because she doesn't actually learn that lesson. She just is proven right. And the episode tries really, really hard to convince you that Seven is in the wrong. Which is also a narrative cheat, by the way. The episode goes way out of its way to convince you that Seven is purely acting out of emotional instability, which would make sense, admittedly. And then, oh no, she was actually right all along. It's just cheating from a writing perspective. This is one of those episodes I would love to rewrite. I'm not going to discuss what I would do with that. I haven't done that in episodes and episodes. Gosh, ever since you guys asked me to not stop doing that. But yeah, this episode, this really deserves a rewrite, because holy crap. Let's go ahead and talk about a couple other things before we really get into the more heavy topics. First of all, very nice matte painting. And very nice graphical setup for the agrarian colony. It was really well done. I like that. Also, the Borg conduit being less than a light year away. And I don't know how much you guys know about light years. I mean, obviously in real life, a light year is a pretty large distance, but in Star Trek terms, a light year is like literally walking across the street. In Star Trek terms, it's nothing. So having a Borg conduit across the street from you. I'm not even going to bring up the obvious question of why didn't you move. I'm not even going to touch that topic. Why would we leave anybody on this planet? If they want to stay here, that's their business. We're going. Bye. I mean, seriously? Now, granted, it was Icheb's choice to stay in the end, so, you know, credit where credit is due. But did nobody consider the fact that the Borg are basically peeking in the window as a problem? Because nobody ever brings that up. Aside from the whole, oh, the Borg have destroyed us. You know, we've heard that story before. Now, Icheb has an interesting reaction throughout this episode. His initial reaction is most interesting, because later on he has a much more typical reaction. But his earlier reaction is probably one of the better written aspects of this story, one of the few things I really like about it. He is like, okay, I don't want to interact with these people. I have nothing to do with these people. Can I go home now? Now, that makes sense from 3 different perspectives, all of which are held by Icheb. First of all, he is an ex-Borg, and he doesn't really understand social customs and political norms and all those things that involve being a normal individual. And so, from the more pragmatic, you know, functional, mathematical, logistical, etc. perspective, this is pointless. You know, as his own statement, he says to the Doctor, parents are irrelevant. I have other individuals to provide the necessary requirements for me, blah, blah, blah. The second perspective that it makes sense from is that he is a young adult. It's yawning. Oh my god. He's a young adult who is still not quite emotionally mature, especially as an extron. But even regardless of being an extron, he doesn't actually understand his own emotional matrix yet. He hasn't figured out who he is yet. And so he's inclined to be more unpredictable in terms of how he responds emotionally to things, regardless of his own logical discourse. And the third reason it makes sense, and I like this one the best, he has no memory of his parents. That makes sense given what we learned. He has no memory of them or his people or anything about them. So, from his perspective, these are strangers and nothing more. These are people who have nothing to do with him, and as far as he's concerned, never have. Now, they might in the future, and he does make that choice in the end, but I want you to imagine for a moment that you suddenly find out you're a Vulcan. That's a bad example. You're a Tarkanian. You know, you don't even know what that is. And you have no memory. Obviously, you have no idea what that is or who that is, but your Tarkanian parents have just shown up and said, hey, we finally found you. That may or may not have any emotional impact on you, especially since they're aliens, and if you're watching my show, you probably have an interest in science fiction, so finding out you're an alien would probably be a good thing. But bear with me here, because you're being asked to go with them and leave Earth, where your family is, and your friends, and your life, and everything that you have actually ever known, to go with total strangers and a culture and society you have know nothing about whatsoever. They could stab each other in the eye every night as a cultural ritual, and you would have no idea. I mean, obviously that's an extreme, but you get my point. Even if there's nothing significantly bad about that shift, you are walking into the total unknown. Wouldn't you be a little hesitant to do that? I'm gonna go ahead and rant about something real quick here. The pathogen that they invent is, and I'm gonna quote myself here, frickety ridiculous. They genetically manipulate their child as he is being born, as he's being crafted, to naturally exude a cybernetic attacking pathogen which manages to take down a Borg cube. This is, of course, the pathogen in the previous episode, as I mentioned. Some good continuity. Apparently, it was not intended to be continuity. It's just the writers of this episode took the idea from the writers of the previous episode and kept going with it. Which, credit where credit is due on the continuity thing. It's just that these are a race of beings who have managed to invent a way to develop a virus that the Borg, who are experts at biological and technological integration, and therefore experts of manipulating the flesh. These are people who can necrotize on a regular basis, reverse necrotization. I'm saying that wrong. Reverse necrotization on a regular basis. And yet, a virus that they've already encountered, I feel like adding, is something that they think is their big weapon against the Borg. I don't buy it. In fact, to be 100% blunt, I wouldn't be surprised if this second time, if each chip had been assimilated, they would say, oh, we recognize that virus. Bzz. Problem solved. Wouldn't that be funny? And then, of course, the Borg would be like, oh, hey, you invented this awesome virus. That's very technologically interesting. Resistance is futile. I think there would actually be a degree of dramatic irony and some good dramatic potential in the writing of these people basically, in creating this weapon against the Borg, have created the bait for the Borg to come back, which leads to them needing to be rescued by Voyager, but would lead to their ultimate destruction if not for the fact that Voyager, their enemies, are there. That would be some good dramatic potential, I think. But whatever. The fact that they can make this thing at all is absolutely mind-blowingly stupid. I'm not even going to go into that. I'm just not going into it. Can't buy it. Sorry. Suspension of disbelief gone. But the other thing I want to talk about is the ethics of the situation. This is kind of the last thing I have to talk about here. What these people are doing is in basically every way the equivalent of putting TNT and dynamite, wrapping it around a child and sending it into a military base. Now, if that doesn't sound horrifying, I got nothing for you. Like, I don't know how to further explain that. Granted, I have a child myself, I have a niece, I've taken care of other people's kids, I have the fatherly instinct thing. I tend to be a little bit protective. I've been there, is what I'm trying to say. And I've noticed that not everyone understands that particular mentality of protectiveness. So maybe I'm just a little bit overprotective of the younglings. But that sounds absolutely horrifying to me. Now, the counter-argument that is immediately put forward is, this is the Borg. Any possible thing that can be done is acceptable, regardless of morals, regardless of ethics. It doesn't matter. We have to do whatever is necessary in order to survive against such an overwhelming, horrifying threat. And that's a hard argument to refute. This is basically kind of... I was just talking about this weekend. I keep bringing up this book. This is kind of a World War Z situation again. Because when you are faced with something so terrible that you have to be terrible to fight it, there's no good answer there. Do these people deserve to be condemned for what they're doing? Does that motorcycle rider deserve to be condemned for what he's doing? Do they deserve to be praised for what they're doing? Is what they're doing morally or ethically justifiable? Now, I point out that fact, justifiable, because I think everyone involved, even them, could pretty much flat out say, this is not morally or ethically right. What they're doing is fundamentally wrong. It's just that what they're doing might be necessary. And that's the real question here. Do you think that what they have done is acceptable? Do you think what they're doing is available? Now, This is another reason why I think that whole twist that I added to the story just now would really add to this, because as is, they've created the perfect anti-Borg weapon. And so the argument can very easily be made, we have a perfect defense against the Borg, and we can and will implement it both with Icheb and future children. We will always be able to defend ourselves against any future Borg incursions, because we've got this perfect virus that shuts down their cubes and makes them go away, and, you know, leave us alone, even though if they're going to be an issue for others. And the episode is structured so that you're just supposed to assume that that just works. Imagine if it doesn't work. Imagine if it was a one-shot. And in trying to re-implement it, in trying to cross the moral and ethical boundary a second time, that's when it backfires and goes back on them, which adds yet another layer of dramatic potential to that scene I mentioned earlier. Oh my god, really? So I feel like that's a great a chance missed there, and I feel like the episode spends no time on this dilemma, this horrifying, gut-wrenching dilemma. These people are sending off their child, their son, as a biological weapon against a horrifying enemy. And yet the episode spends, like, 2 scenes on that topic. The whole rest of the episode is all devoted towards Seven not learning a lesson about humanity. Which is another reason why I just felt like skip thinking too much of it. Because it's like, ah, come on, get to the good stuff. Anyways, I actually don't have much else to say about this. The moral and ethical quandaries there are the big point. I would really love to hear your guys' thoughts on this one, because in my opinion, there really is no good answer as presented in the episode to the situation. I mean, they have this perfect weapon. They might as well just keep making kids that are biological weapons and flinging them at the Borg in the future, because it'll work. And let's be honest, because of the fact that the episode states it as though it does work, that's probably what happens. As Voyager moves on and takes Icheb with them, the people on that planet keep making more biological ticking time bombs and sending them off to the Borg. Sacrificial lambs, if you will. Regardless, I'll see you guys next time.